Okay, hello and welcome to live programming at the More Freedom Foundation. Today we've got a special guest, my old roommate Ray, and today is kind of an awkward day for me. Today is a day where I eat humble pie, and I admit that I was wrong and Ray was right. Sort of in penance for that, we get to do what we don't normally do on this channel very much, which is do a review of Donald Trump's presidency and what a freaking nightmare it is. So yeah, this is not going to be a very friendly broadcast for the anti-Trump folks. So that's what we're going to get into, sort of standard preliminaries. There's a live chat that's going on right now. You are invited to be as mean to me as you want. You should be more charitable to my guest Ray, and you should be civil to each other. If you're in the live chat just being abusive, you will be blocked. Please don't do that. This should be a lot of fun. So we're gonna do a bit of a conversation, Ray and I. For about an hour or so. I think we're probably inevitably going to end up on the topic, arguing about the topic of Russia towards the end. And then after about an hour, we will just dive into the live chat and answer any questions you may have. And that's what we're doing today. If you have questions that you really care about, that you're asking while or discussing while we're having our conversation, keep in mind that I can't sort of go back. I don't have the mental bandwidth to go back and find those questions. So just ask them again when we start the Q&A part of the presentation. All right, so Ray, you want to say hi to the folks?
Yeah, Rob, appreciate it, buddy. Thank you so much. Good to be here on the More Freedom Foundation. I know it's been a couple years, man, since we've got to do one of these videos.
It has.
So I'm excited about it, man. I'm excited. I do appreciate you graciously admitting that you were wrong and losing that bet we made a couple years back. And,
yes, I'm sure you're pleased about that.
I do not hear you admit that you were wrong many times.
No, you do not.
I have a feeling that I was hoping that you were going to admit you were wrong about this Russian thing. But I have a feeling we'll get to that later.
Yeah, let's get to that later.
Seems like you're hanging on to your position there. So I'm thinking maybe a new bet at the end of this.
Well, we'll see.
Topic maybe cool. So.
We'll see. We'll see. So basically, at root, to explain for those who maybe have not been with us for 2 years, I lived with Ray in San Diego back in 2017. And we sort of got into an argument, as we have been getting into arguments for about 20 years, around the time, this is distant past now, you may or may not remember it, when the Republicans had their first kind of half-assed attempt to repeal Obamacare, and it failed miserably. So I took an interpretation that you could find all over the media at that time, where I was like, oh, well, this is actually probably part of Donald Trump's sinister plan. Because what had happened to me is that after decades of experience growing up in New York City and being aware of just what a worthless thug Donald Trump was, I was fooled. I was so gobsmacked by the fact that he had won the election that I was like, oh gosh, like maybe he really does know what's going on. And if you may remember, like there were people in his administration like Steve Bannon and Jeff Sessions, and it was legitimately frightening because it was like these guys somehow managed to take power. I don't know how they did this. And it looked like they had a plan. And it looked like what I thought was likely and was actually a real opportunity that I think Trump had and that I'm glad that he flubbed was an opportunity to really finally turn the Republican Party into a sort of blue collar party. To sort of take the, for lack of a better term, sort of poor whites and really center them in the party and turn it into this sort of, borderline fascist, making the trains run on time, free goodies for white people party. I thought that was a real potential possibility, and I was terrified. And that's the mindset where I was at. Ray was in a different mindset. You want to describe that, Ray?
Yeah. So at the time, I was taken back by your comment that you thought Trump and or his administration would start pushing for universal health care, simply because I know that at the end of the day, he's in it for his bottom line. And I think he's proven that through the decisions and actions he's taken for his entire life almost, that we know about, that it's his mentality first. And I didn't see him using any of his political capital to push forward a universal health care bill that would have been extremely disliked by his more conservative portion of his base. So I just didn't see any way that the Freedom Caucus was going to allow that to happen in that first opportunity, that first 2-year window that he had.
And I think you were absolutely right. I think
I mean, they not only held him hostage on that, they held him hostage on several things, and he it seems like started to just default to their position, because it felt like he was either serving his base or he felt like the only real way he's going to get anything done in that particular Congress. So either way.
So I guess I was kind of fooled. I fooled a little bit by the rhetoric. Like, I really, they were talking about,
we all been fooled by the rhetoric, have we not? I mean, Rob, from day one, I mean, there's a lot of people, I think, that regret their vote for him right now because they were fooled by the rhetoric. I mean, there's some people who don't, but I think there's a large growing number of people who regret. And honestly, he did a really good con job. I mean, that's what this comes down to in my mind. I mean, he's a grifter and he has talent in some respect. And he definitely sold a certain section of this country a bill of goods that they wanted to hear at the time, and they really just ate it up.
And I think once again, you were right, I was wrong. But I think another sort of, I think there was a real opportunity there that Trump had to sort of successful. Like, it absolutely could have been, what do they call it, like a reorganizing, there's a term for it, like a reorganizing election or a transformational election or something like that.
Sure.
Like, he could have changed this country, to my mind, for the worst. Like, he could have turned it into and I think Steve Bannon's quite explicit about this, wanting, the United States to be more like Europe, to be like, not in the social justice sense, but that's part of it, but in the like white ethno state sense. Like, they really had that opportunity, and that's why he's sort of scrambling and flailing in such a sad and desperate manner over the wall right now, is because that's the last scraps of that. So it's great that it's fantastic that, and we've really kind of dodged the bullet in that, like, these clowns are clowns and did failed completely to change America. I mean, we're looking at 2 years of a lame duck presidency here.
They had a great opportunity, given they controlled both houses of Congress and the presidency, to pretty much do almost anything they wanted. They have a history of pushing things through regardless of popular opinion or what their opposition party wants. It is kind of surprising that they weren't more effective. I mean, I in preparing for this was thinking about some of the highlights, thinking about some of the things that have occurred in the first 2 years. Like, what did they do? What got done? And it seemed like it's what didn't get done or what got undone. That was what they focused on. And then they didn't get to repeal Obamacare, so they ran on that for a better part of a decade, right? John McCain gave him the big middle finger at one point, and they didn't get that done. So that was a pretty big failure on Paul Ryan's part and on Trump's part. However, if you just look at some of the stuff,
I think it's a failure we should all be grateful for, because
absolutely. I mean, I'm so happy they're inept at their job. I mean, if they weren't terrible at what they do, man, we would definitely be living in a worse world. I think, though, the other side of that coin, though, Rob, is I really feel like we are living in a worse world. I don't know that we escaped what we thought was going to happen. I think it's just
I really
reality.
Like, just that golden moment where Jeff Sessions got thrown out on his ass, because I mean, it's interesting because there are a lot of people sort of regretting that, because they're like, oh, like, Jeff Sessions is honorable and he recused himself, yada yada. Like, that fucking guy is like the standard bearer of white supremacy. Like, that guy was too racist to get a judgeship in the fucking 80s.
Yeah,
right?
no, I mean,
sorry, maybe it wasn't a judgeship. I think it was something he had to be confirmed.
Yeah, that's when Martin
Luther King's wife.
Yeah, I think Martin Luther King's wife wrote a letter about how unqualified he was, and I think Jeff Sessions is a well-known character, and wasn't surprised that Trump put him in that position. And I was also deathly afraid that there was going to be an assault on civil liberties.
And there was, and there is.
There absolutely has been.
It could have been so much worse.
But the surprise thing that came and that Trump obviously didn't expect was him recusing himself from the overseeing the Mueller investigation. That was huge, and I don't think that he never could get over that. That was the hump he can never get over. So no matter how Stone Age he is in his policies and what he was trying to do, it was never going to be good enough for Trump or the conservatives once he recused himself and could not obstruct that investigation. Right. So I was definitely afraid of Sessions, and then it turned out to be one of Trump's best fires in my mind. But
I don't know. Well, I think it is. Yeah. I mean, you're right. I mean, this is obviously it's been a stressful 2 years and whatnot, but I think it's worth, I'm the sort of incorrigible optimist, is just when you consider that like Trump's inauguration speech, most of his races, I mean, it was George Wallace, it was it was 1960s segregationist, just this really batshit semi-fascist stuff that killed. It killed. There were people lapping that shit up. The Republican base is still completely owned by Trump because of that, just old school vileness.
Well, I mean, Trump was very good.
So just one, I'll finish.
Yeah,
and what's extraordinary is that it failed, and that's something we should be really incredibly grateful for.
Absolutely. No, I mean, there's no question that fear is the key linchpin of a lot of his strategy. I mean, if you look at
most politicians' strategy, but yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I think we came off a president that used the opposite of fear, in whether it's cliche or not, hope, change. I think he spread a lot more love than we currently see in our current administration. I guess what I was getting at is that coming off of a transformational figure like Obama was, regardless of whether or not you supported him in his positions, it's clear he was a transformational president in that he didn't look the part, and he certainly didn't speak and talk the part, and he actually energized a lot of people in this country who didn't typically participate in politics. Trump did the same thing, a smaller percentage, but it was the complete opposite of those people that Obama encouraged and got passionate about politics. Trump used fear and the fear of a future of more Barack Obamas to get a lot of people to turn out and to essentially channel that anger that they have, because there's a lot of angry people on that side. If you recall,
well, but it's also, I think also it's not. It is absolutely a reaction, but also I think some legitimate disappointment in Obama in sort of assuming that some of those promises were not met. So
yeah, well, I mean, if that's the litmus test, promises made on the campaign trail, nobody would ever be successful in politics.
I think I'm not. Obama was obviously preferable to what we have now, but he was not a flawless president by any means.
There was a point in time that I thought George Bush was going to be the worst president I ever saw in my life, and I would take George Bush 1,000 times over right now compared to what we have.
Donald Trump hasn't started any wars.
Yeah, I mean, and I knew you were going to jump on that one, but I mean, I got to tell you, I think George H.W. Bush is a damn sight better than Donald Trump.
Well, HW, I'd agree, but W.
Yeah. And W for that matter. I mean, I mean, even though he drove us to the brink of the cliff and we almost fell off, he is not the abject failure that I believe Donald Trump is. In that, I believe the damage he's doing
the nice thing about Trump. The nice thing about Trump is he's not, that I'm realizing now, is that he's not effective enough to be as damaging as the first Bush.
Well, I mean, I from a policy standpoint, I agree. And from a policy standpoint, he was only able to pass his tax cuts, which frankly, that's all that I think anyone that supported him really honestly cared about was getting those tax cuts passed. And you're right, policy wise, he hasn't been very successful. He's been more successful at pulling out of deals than he has been making any deals. And as a negotiator, he's been pretty much a failure. However, the damage I'm talking about is cultural. It is diplomatic. It is global. It is like, for instance, I mean, the trade war. I mean, there is any number of things that I could point to where his damage is far-reaching and it touches the lives of everyday Americans. And so,
I think that's a really interesting point. Whereas, like, psychologically, Trump is absolutely more damaging, and also in terms of just like how we feel as Americans, how we feel about each other as Americans. But like, I'm a big fan of like just sort of like following the tape through historically. And I think like the Trump presidency and how damaging it has been wouldn't have been possible without some of the terrible decisions that Bush made and some of the terrible decisions that Obama made. Like,
sure. I mean,
like
yeah,
there's no Trump presidency without ISIS, and there's no ISIS without Bush's Iraq invasion, and no ISIS without Obama's funding.
yeah. I mean, but at the end of the day, there's always been terrorism, Rob. I mean, I don't think that's fair to say that there would be no ISIS without these events or individuals. I think terrorism.
Oh, no, I think that's very fair to say, actually.
So terrorism has existed since it's whoever's not in power, Rob. I mean, it's terrorism, and those that are called terrorists are those people who are not in power that believe that they should have some representation or are fighting for whatever representation they believe they should have, whether you agree with them or not, or whether they're brutal or whether they're evil entities.
Look, sure, terrorism.
I don't think terrorism it would still exist without those individuals playing out on the world stage.
But I'm not talking about terrorism. I'm talking about ISIS specifically, and like that version of like radical Islamic terrorism or whatever is impossible without the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia.
I thought radical Islamist groups existed before either of those presidents. You don't think they existed prior to those presidents?
Yeah, they were created by the U.S., the CIA, and Saudi Arabia in the 80s.
Gotcha. So you don't think there was any terrorist groups prior to the 80s when we emboldened?
There absolutely were. They were more. Those were the ones that the Soviets supported, which were more communist left wing, like sort of earlier.
I guess my point is no matter the current dominant power in the world, there's always going to be a minority that will be labeled as terrorists, and so there
will always be large terrorist movements as long as large state actors like the U.S. and the Soviet Union support them.
I think the key is that I've always thought the United States of America was the leader on the world stage when it came to addressing those types of groups that prey on people's fear, that commit acts of terror in order to try to get their way. I've always thought we were the light on the hill, if you will, the shining beacon that was supposed to protect those countries that couldn't protect themselves.
Well, no, I'm not saying that we're certainly the world leader in creating those groups.
But. Well, yeah. So I'm not saying that we don't have and haven't had. And made mistakes that have emboldened and or created or maybe even gave them more campaign fodder to recruit people. But the reality is that we formed this country, right, because we were trying to get away from taxation and persecution. And I think that's kind of been the culture of our country, is to always be accepted of immigrants, always be accepted of multiple ways of life, different diverse backgrounds, and then also to provide aid and assistance to people that need it throughout the globe, even though we are guilty.
That's what the U.S. culture and self-image is. That's not what the U.S. government does.
See, I disagree. I mean, I think, of course, Rob, there's going to be other arguments that can be made that say we aren't that, right? But there are also many arguments that can be made that say we absolutely. I mean, you could look at any number of international situations where we have stabilize that situation and help to produce some sort of a amenable result, right? There's a number of international.
I agree that the State Department.
It's not all bad, is what I'm saying, Rob. We're not
this business has done good things. I don't think the U.S. military has done anything of value since World War II.
Yeah, see, that's where I'm going to disagree. I mean, obviously, I think you have a certain opinion of our intelligence apparatus, of our military, and while, trust me, I think our military budget is completely overblown, completely bloated, and preparing for a war like it's 1950, right? And we're wasting a lot of money that could be used for domestic programs and things that would enrich in our lives here in America, as well as maybe reallocate our forces and our abilities in a more strategic way. But at the end of the day, I just don't agree that we are this one-sided monster, right? I think we do.
I've never said that we're a one-sided monster. I think the U.S. influence in general, culturally, politically, maybe not politically, economically, has been the greatest force for good in human history, for sure. Yeah. U.S. government, U.S. military, U.S. intelligence community has been a fucking disaster since World War II. It's been
like I said, man. I mean, that's just I can't go there, dude. I mean. Right. I can't go there, Rob. A disaster. I mean, that those are strong words for, I think, there's a lot of hardworking, morally, ethically, exemplary individuals working every single day of their lives to try to do a job they believe is very important, which is protecting what we consider our freedoms at home.
And they're occasionally.
I just don't agree that it's all bad, man. I can't. Since World War II, our military apparatus and our military like, for instance, there's been several terrorist attacks that have been thwarted by individuals that are in our intelligence community that have gathered the information, took action, and prevented some things happening on U.S. soil and on foreign soil.
There's been like 3 since 9/11, and there's been like 300 that the FBI invented. But I think that's a different.
I mean, like I said, that's a different question. What you can say, yeah. So ultimately,
okay, but I think we're already providing. I think we're already providing previews.
We digress.
This conversation is going to end. Let's get back to Trump failures. Huh?
All right, let me just do a quick little highlight bullet points, and then I'd like to drop into something that I think you'll like as well. But just honestly, the thing he did pass was the tax cuts. Obviously, I don't agree with him. I think that was what the whole point of getting this man elected for a lot of people were to continue to pilfer, if you will, of the pocketbook of America. The Helsinki situation, which is
on the tax cuts, like just recently, people have been like, "Oh, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wants to, tax the rich people at 70%," and I, like, as a conservative, say, "Fuck yeah!" Like, do you know what our deficit looks like? Do you know what our national debt looks like? It's
where are all those deficit hawks? Where are all those deficit hawks at every year? We're talking.
Well, one of them's right here, and yes, we need. Allow me to say, like, as a conservative, as a deficit hawk, we desperately need tax increases. Desperately.
Yeah. Because I would agree with that. I would agree with that. And so, anyway, I didn't agree with it. It got done. But then since then, really, it's just been like a series of really unusual things, like his date with Kim Jong-un. Like that was just an abject failure. The Helsinki situation, that was an embarrassment of epic proportions. Like the capitulating that was done in that situation, I think is really what opened a lot of eyes. Even though maybe your eyes aren't quite open, I think a lot of eyes are open.
I think we'll have a long discussion about Russia later, but that particular press conference in Helsinki, where like Donald Trump got up there and was like, my guys say one thing, but Putin says another thing.
He's very forceful.
Was one of the most like I am someone who believes that the U.S. is the aggressor with Russia, the U.S. is the aggressor with Iran, but for the love of God, don't look like a goddamn wuss up there.
Yeah,
I think that basic. I'd be embarrassed. I'd be embarrassed if like Slovenia, a country of 1 million people, had a press conference with Russia that was that abject and, frankly, filleting. I say that as like a huge Russiagate skeptic, like that Helsinki.
I know. And so it's incredibly embarrassing because you admit in that moment how obvious it is that he's in Putin's pocket to some degree and or somehow emboldened, but indebted to these individuals by the way he speaks about them. If you look at the body language, even just simple body language between the two, one guy's sitting there with a smirk on his face like he just got one over on the world, and the other guy's sitting there like he's hoping he doesn't get in trouble for what he's getting ready to say.
Well, we can get into that. We can get into that later, Ray.
Let's
try and work through it before an inevitable Russia shadow.
All right. So the next interesting thing I thought was the porn star drama. I mean, Michael Avenatti, I actually like the guy. I think that he was very effective. See, I'm sure you don't, but I think he was very effective at drilling home points and bringing things to the forefront in our current culture, which is driven by the TV media, that many other politicians haven't been able to do. I think he was very effective at what he was doing, whether or not he's a good individual or not.
Didn't he also he wasn't a very effective attorney. Wasn't Stormy Daniels?
He's had some sort of back debt that wasn't paid. I mean, at the end of the day, that's just like anybody else. They try to find people like
his client was Stormy Daniels, and Stormy Daniels is now obligated to pay $200,000.
Yeah, and so I think it's because there were several cases that were brought, and I don't think all of them were end up in his favor. I think that might have been another. He might have threw everything he could against the wall, and then that one didn't stick, right? And she's gonna have to pay. I think she's on the better end of this deal, to be honest with you, than just losing that one decision.
I mean, it's true. I think Stormy Daniels is going to have some very lucrative opportunities.
Yeah, I think she's going to be a winner in this.
So she'll be okay, but I'm just not super impressed.
So we'll take it one step up from the porn star drama, and we'll go to the Playmate drama, right? So he had another Playmate that he paid off. Both these individuals are I think just scratching the surface of the payoffs that he's made to women for inappropriate behavior and or whether they were affairs that needed to be covered up. I mean, he has a long history of being a womanizer and a creep, frankly. So maybe even potentially a sexual predator, right? I mean, I don't know a lot of guys in the locker room that talk about grabbing pussies, Rob. I just don't. I mean, we've had a lot of raunchy locker room talk. That doesn't happen. Sounds like a sexual predator admitting his crimes is what it sounded like to me personally.
That kind of talk, like I might have heard it in the locker room, like
I didn't.
High school in the 90s. Like it's like the fact that a 50, like what, he was 50 or 65-year-old man is talking that way. Like that's just infantile.
Yeah, no, I mean, at the end of the day, the guy that was interviewing him and simply laughing at what he was saying got in more trouble than he did, right? So, that poor guy couldn't get a job anymore, and that's because, and I'm not a fan of his per se, but I don't believe he deserved to take that kind of punishment when Donald Trump was then elected president shortly thereafter.
Yeah, I mean, like, should we talk about it? Is Michael Cohen next on your list?
Oh, so what I was just going to say, a couple more were, I think the trade war, we're going to get on that. I think that's just an abject failure. And the tariffs that have been placed since have caused a lot of damage in my mind.
Well, what's incredible is like, he's fucking, I think I did a video that, excuse me, I shouldn't be swearing. I did a video on this a couple of weeks back. Like, the biggest potential threat that China, like in the short term, poses to the world is China's economy flopping. Because if China's economy flops, like that's, I mean, I don't know what the exact figures are, but that's like half of all economic growth or something like that is the Chinese economy. Like Fortune 500 companies like make most of their money in China, or no, sorry, make most of their new profit and revenue in China. So what he's doing, what he's managed, what it seems more and more likely he might have done with this trade war is kill the Chinese golden goose. Now, of course, China was already shaky. China had all kinds of problems, but it could have limped on for another couple of years, like with 6% growth. But no, Trump killed it. And like by doing that might also kill the economic recovery.
I don't think he might.
It's insane. Yeah.
I think he's already stagnated. I mean, right now the market seemed to be reacting like a kid who's not taking his medication, a bipolar child. I mean, they're just swinging one way. There's a lot of instability globally. I believe it's already starting to slow down because of that instability. I think you're right in that it might have checked China to a certain degree, but I think China was always an issue financially. I mean, they're both.
I agree. I agree.
Right? I mean, in my mind, they're a house of cards waiting to fall, depending on what card falls, but. Ultimately, that trade war, I'm talking about the impact in America on losing American jobs. I'm talking about the impact on the everyday lives of Americans. So I happen to work in industries that were directly affected. I have colleagues that were laid off because the rise in cost of materials made it so that no one forecasted that rise in material costs. All of a sudden, steel costs that much more. All of a sudden, our farm products cost that much more or had a larger tariff placed on it, right? So there's all this scrambling. The farm bill, the billions of dollars given away to make farmers whole when they took a serious loss. So the construction and development industry, I'm a technologies integration type of an industry within the telecom industry. And so we've even felt that impact. I mean, so ultimately, these decisions have ramifications globally and domestically. And that was just, I think, a really poor decision that was made on a whim, like almost every other decision he makes. And the ramifications, we don't even truly understand what they're going to be. If the market starts taking a slide and it's not recoverable, what does he have to hang his hat on at this point? I mean, that is
what's interesting is they already have. Like in 2018 was the first.
It's flat, right?
Not even flat. I think on most asset classes, Dow, S&P 500, bonds, fucking Bitcoin. Like,
but we've seen this before, Rob.
Everybody lost money.
We've seen this show before, man. It's like a Democrat will come in and get the economy going. A Republican will come in and literally strip it down like he's going in and breaking up a corporation to be sold off in parts and pieces. I mean, Obama spent 8 years getting the economy back to where it was at, and it was roaring when Donald Trump took over. And then everyone thought, oh, no regulation. We got a Republican in. It's going to be great. And for a year it was. And then they started to do the trade wars and all these just unbelievably ridiculously poor decisions. And now all of a sudden, instability, we're seeing flat growth. I mean, how long before we fly back into a recession and then we're going to be looking for another Democrat to come in and save our ass? I mean,
I absolutely agree with you on that, Ray. Like, even during the Obama administration, maybe I'd like try and push back on that. But no, it's objectively true. Republicans spend like drunken sailors, destroy everything, and then Democrats come in and try and pick up the pieces for 4 to 8 years, and then Republicans come in and fuck it all up again. Well, that's just a fact. That's not what I want to. That's not what I want to believe. That's objectively what's happened if you look at the history of the last 4 years.
I think systemically, Rob, it comes from. I think systemically, Rob, it comes from the core of what it is to be a fiscal conservative Republican and or a Democrat. In that they believe in aggregating wealth up to those individuals that are job creators that are then going to then spread the wealth around. But all that's done is aggregate wealth up to people that are hoarding it, holding on to it, and using it for their own gains and the gains of those people that are in their small networks. And that has been essentially the pattern we keep getting into. We get these large infrastructure policies. We get these job growth policies. We'll get a lot of bottom-up growth initiatives under Democrats, and then we'll get a lot of top-down stuff under Republicans. And that ends up aggregating wealth to the top and squeezing the middle class down into being basically into poverty. We don't have a living wage right now. Our minimum wage is ridiculous. I mean, we're at a stage where we're starving the individuals at the bottom that represent like 95% of the population. So,
well, I mean, I think that's sort of like the standard, critique of neoliberalism or what have you. And I think there's a lot of truth to it. But also, I mean, Democrats have sort of bought into a lot of the same ideology about, being business friendly and whatnot. The Democrats are just better administrators. They just,
I would agree that
they just actually know how to do things and respect government and try to do things well. Whereas the Republicans, they're like the fucking punk rock party. They just come in to break shit. It's disgusting, and it's not.
I can go on that for a while, but I'll just say just a couple more. It actually is really not a couple more. The last one is Russia. This is not leading into the conversation, but I would like to say one thing. I think throughout my entire lifetime, the left of this country, the progressive side of this country, has been abject failures at the PR game on how to label or how to brand an idea or a policy or a bill, and Republicans just kill at this game. So this whole collusion versus conspiracy when it comes to Russia.
Are we getting to Russia already?
Not yet, but I wanted to mention that I thought that was just an absolute failure, in that the term collusion and the term conspiracy are two different things. And I think the whole time we've been talking about collusion, I mean, he's tweeted about it 1,000 times. There's no collusion. I think that was a failure. It's always been a conspiracy in my mind. And I think that's proving out with the information that's coming out into the public course through court filings and sentence documents and what have you. We're not going to dive hard into it, Rob, but I just want to say, I think that was a PR failure, and that we should be talking about a conspiracy from day one, because that's really what it was. Collusion is this really ambiguous thing that no one knows what it means and how what legal statutes even apply. But conspiracy, I can understand that. Conspiracy is what Butina, who I know you're a big fan of Maria Butina.
I am a big fan of Butina.
Yeah, that's what she pled guilty to, right? So ultimately, I think conspiracy is what we're talking about. And so, but when we get into it, we can talk about that more. Then the last thing is, it's just the turnover and drama in the White House. I've never seen in my life, and I know that I'm only 38 years old to date myself. I've never seen this kind of turnover. I've never seen people literally run and hide from a job in the White House, from some of these positions that are people literally work their entire lives to get. Instead, he can't keep them employed. He's hiring just the absolute worst people. And remember, I'm gonna hire the best people. I'm gonna have all the best plans. I mean, let's just talk a little bit about the drama and the almost soap opera style White House that we currently have.
I think the problem with there was that they never expected to win. They didn't.
No,
they didn't,
absolutely.
Just like the Brexit people. Just like
Russia never expected. Russia never expected Donald Trump to get the nomination to be president for the Republicans. I don't think they never thought that would happen. When it did, it certainly kicked in gear. So to not continue to harp on Russia before we get there. I really believe he's trying to run our government, and he ran his campaign like a reality TV show. He tried to extend that to our government. That reality TV show has digressed into a soap opera from hell. So instead of, having like Days of Our Lives, we have like The Endless Nightmare, or like, if my dad's favorite, Young and the Restless, we have like The Old and the Grumpy. You know what I mean? Like we have this just a failure of a government that only cares about what is purported on the news and how their face looks on TV, as opposed to any of the ideas they're putting up, their moral compass, our standing in the world, our ability to provide shelter for those that have been taken advantage of, or that are, seeking asylum, etc.
I think that's just his complete lack of preparation for this, and just he's supposedly a businessman. That's supposedly his pitch.
He hires the best people, Rob.
Yeah,
so yeah. Let's look at who he's hired.
And a businessman is supposed to, actually, I don't think that's entirely fair, but you could say that, a businessman is supposed to do good deals and hire good people. And
I mean,
it's done neither of those things.
I think every great business is because they have a lot of good people in their organization, man, and they make smart decisions, right? So let's look at some of Trump's worst hires, or maybe for you, it might have been his best hire because of how abject of a failure they became. But let's just number one on the list, your personal lawyer, Michael Cohen.
Michael Cohen. It's just if you want a pure insight into what Donald Trump is, look at the man who worked for him for 25 fucking years.
Yeah,
Michael
I think Cohen it was like a solid as a decade, right? He had a decade as his personal lawyer. I mean, they might have worked together longer, but his personal everyday fixer lawyer for a decade is this just, I mean, the guy is a
sort of reject from the Sopranos casting, like,
he does look like this. He does look like the slightly touched cousin of one of the mobsters from Sopranos, doesn't he? Like,
yeah, I mean,
the guy who always messes up, who accidentally shoots himself or something.
Yeah, so, exactly. And then like that was Trump's go-to guy for legal advice for 10 years. I think that should indicate to you the lack of seriousness of the Trump organization, Trump's whole approach to life. Yeah. And it's that is Michael Cohen is Trump world.
I think that what he is example of is Trump's hiring strategy, which essentially I need the most loyal person that will do whatever I say, not question it, and whose morals and ethics are essentially for sale. Yeah. That's the type of people I believe he wants. People that he can control financially, people that he knows are going to do his bidding and not question the moral or ethical nature of it. And I think Michael Cohen was the perfect person. I just think that once you get in serious trouble and you start to have to think about long-term ramifications and impacts, he came to the light, but it's a self-serving thing. I mean, he came to the light because it got him 3 years in prison as opposed to 8 years in prison, right? Yeah. And so it got his family to keep some of their money as opposed to having to give up all their money. Yeah. So it's a very poor hire, right? Can we agree? Yeah. Terrible hire.
Yeah, I think we can agree. All right. And just like looking at it, it's so because he thought he was going to be, and I think this gets into the Russia stuff a little bit, because he expected to be, running a competitor to Fox News in 2017 rather than being president. He just surrounded himself with just the worst sort of right-wing hacks, like people like
started with this. I think so. Rush. I mean, Rob, this may be a good segue in that. Right when he won the nomination, look at the people that he started to put into positions of power right away. Who was his campaign manager? Well, he's now a convicted felon, but his campaign manager was Paul Manafort. That was the person he hired to run his campaign. Then, for significantly less than a year. I think Manafort was fired after the convention, wasn't he? Yeah, but when was he hired? See, that's my point. When was he hired? He was hired.
I don't recall.
Right? He was hired. He was hired to be campaign manager basically when they found out he was going to get the nomination. So essentially, that's what I meant. I think he was developed, and I think he's been turned long ago for financial reasons and many other reasons. But I think all of a sudden, when he won the primary and he became the nominee, that's when the influence really began. And
okay, so we're talking about Russia.
We're not talking about Russia, but we're talking about a terrible hire. We're talking about a terrible hire.
We have 15 minutes. We have got 15 minutes. We should probably start talking about Russia.
Okay, how about this?
Can I do it? Can I?
Yeah, set it up. Set the table.
Okay, so I think there's a lot of stuff about Russia, and I don't dispute that Russia wanted Trump to win. Obviously, I don't dispute that there's a lot of like really shady stuff out there, and I'm looking forward to what the Mueller investigation comes up with. I'm looking forward to what the House, the various House committees that are about to start investigating this. I really look forward to what's coming out. So I don't actually dispute many of the actual facts that Ray is going to have a very definite interpretation of here. What I dispute is the idea that they are out of the ordinary, or that they have this sort of special meaning. This morning to prepare, I sort of went through the New York Times's sort of what we know about the Russia investigation so far, and looked into the Maria Butina case a little bit. And what's really interesting is like the criminalization of things that are kind of run of the mill. Some of them are absolutely not. Absolutely. I mean, obviously hacking the DNC, some of the more aggressive social media stuff, but it's basically sort of run of the mill diplomacy stuff in the case of Butina in particular, that have been criminalized and turned into this horrific thing. And it's there's this incredible mass of information. There's a lot of stuff to keep on top of that I don't, frankly, which is why I was reviewing this morning. And it's at every opportunity, the stuff about Russia, unlike the stuff about Saudi Arabia or the UAE, that's I think probably more damning, is instantly given the worst, conspiratorial, way, interpretation possible. There's this documentary sort of active measures or something like that. And it's like reading these sentences, it's all this stuff that's did you know that corrupt people from other countries buy real estate in New York City? It's just all this stuff that, yes, is obvious. Do you know that other countries try to use Washington, D.C. cocktail parties to influence U.S. politicians? It's yes, obviously, that's sort of what countries do. And while I don't dispute for a second that Russia wanted Trump to win, that Russia did illegal things to try to get Trump to win, I don't dispute those for a second, and I'm eager to find out whether or not we can implicate anybody in the Trump campaign. What I object to and what I dislike is the character, and I'm not saying Ray has done this, but I do see a lot of this, is this characterization of the new Pearl Harbor. That actually is in the New York Times September sum up of Russiagate, is a Pearl Harbor-like attack. And as someone who's very critical of the military-industrial complex, I do really, really object to efforts to construct a new Cold War and this idea that this sinister, everybody screws with people's elections. And this idea that there's some sinister, unprecedented Pearl Harbor-like attack is what happened here. I don't believe that is what happened. I believe there was an influence campaign. I believe that Russia wanted Trump to win. I am eager to see if we can prosecute anybody in the Trump campaign for this. That I agree with completely with Ray, and I think you'd agree with those statements. What I do not like is this sort of rush to a new Cold War and this use of "we're at war" language. We've been attacked, cyber war, because I don't feel it to be appropriate, and I feel that it serves other agendas that I don't like. So that's my take on Russia. Ray, take it away.
Oh man, Rob, I mean, you just gave me so much information in that monologue that I can't scribble notes fast enough to actually say what I think maybe 60% of the country would say to you right now. In that, for instance, this is not normal diplomacy. The notion that this is somehow always happening, this isn't something that is uniquely disturbing on so many levels, I think is your first mistake in this, is that this,
put on my sunglasses.
For instance, we just had it come to light that the FBI, after he fired after he fired James Comey, started an open investigation to determine whether or not he was an asset of the Russian government. This has never happened before. This isn't business as usual. This isn't something that we have some experience with. I think that was one of the challenges when our intelligence services start figuring out how deep these ties went and how deep this infiltration went within his campaign and now his administration, is how do we root out a cancerous sore that has embedded itself so deep into not only our culture, our social media, and our actual political establishment? How do we do that? Well, we have to let the course run. We have to let it run its course legally. We have to literally legally, with beyond a shadow of a doubt, prove these facts in order for this to be rooted out permanently. Now, so that's one thing. This is not par for the course. This isn't normal diplomacy. This isn't something that happens in every election. So I just disagree with that. The level and the amount of time and effort that's been spent to influence and to staff people within his administration and campaign with Russia-friendly individuals. I mean, the amount of smoke, it's not just smoke anymore, Rob. It's an inferno. It's a fire, my friend.
I think the problem here is that, and I think one of the reasons that, unlike most Trump haters, and I am a Trump hater, the reason that I'm kind of a little more immune to this sort of Russia fascination is the fact that I have, I think, a broader sense of U.S. Russia relations since the Cold War, and I'm actually pretty sure that when it comes to like the FBI's chosen policy towards Russia and Donald Trump's chosen policy towards Russia, I'll go with Donald Trump every time, because I believe, and I think that's sort of the key thing. Like, if you want to believe that being nice to Russia in any capacity, in any way, having a positive attitude towards Russia is, and I'm not saying I have a positive attitude. I think it's obviously an authoritarian place. It's obviously a mess. I think we've contributed to that, actually. But like the fact that I prefer peace with Russia to war is enough to like get an investigation. You know, like if were I Donald Trump,
I
think that's the thing, is that I support Donald Trump's efforts.
So let me
policy efforts that I support to like have peace with Russia, and the U.S. intelligence community doesn't like that. I mean, like, I ran a video on this 2 years ago, and I'm still there.
Let's hold on a second. Yeah. I don't think by any stretch of the imagination anyone here is fooled that Donald Trump's Russian policy came from Donald Trump. It didn't. The things that he does and the action he takes benefit Russia in a way where you're like, why is every intelligence service that we have flat out unequivocally saying that they helped orchestrate and helped to influence the campaign to get him elected? Why is all his decisions?
Because they did.
Hold on, Rob. Why has every decision that he's made since he's been president when it comes to Russia been in Russia's best interest? When he just unilaterally pulled out against all of his advisors' best wishes and against all the information given him today out of Syria with no plan and no backing or no reasoning, his defense secretary resigned shortly after this because it was a straw that broke the camel's back. Regardless of your belief on whether it was right, Rob, in Syria, he just isn't taking the advice of the individuals in his organization, the people that are Americans looking out for America's best interest. He's doing what's in the best interest of Russia. Why is he always trying to destabilize NATO and pull out of NATO? That would also benefit Russia greatly. Why is he trying to give Vladimir Putin the penthouse of a project that was never even fully funded when he was running for a campaign that he was still trying to get funded, that would have enriched his family by hundreds of millions of dollars? Like, why is it when you see all these why is he tearing up notes from translators? Why we have no records of any of his meetings with Putin? Why is he having unscheduled meetings with Putin that nobody is there to witness? Like, these are not, if you believe in coincidence, then you can run around calling this a coincidence every single time something continues to add up that he is under the thumb in some way, willingly or unwillingly, of the Russian government. I mean, ultimately, I'm not an investigative journalist, Rob, but there are some very, very talented investigative journalists. And I mentioned to you when we had talked previously, when we were catching up, that Donald Trump's been in the pocket of Russian oligarchs and organized crime individuals and individuals of their government since the early 80s. I've actually known this. A lot of his funding was coming from banks that have recently been found guilty of laundering money for the Russian government. So there's so much fire and so much smoke, it's unbelievable. But it just to help out, and I'm gonna suggest these books to you. You may not read them or even look at them, but I really, really believe there's 3 books that would be very useful in helping you here. For instance, if you want to know about Donald Trump's history and the long campaign to develop him as an asset when he was financially on his knees in the early 80s, the first book would be House of Trump, House of Putin by Craig Unger. Check it out, right? If you want to look a little bit more about the influence into our campaign and like what was done on Donald Trump's behalf to try to get him to become president, you want to look at a book by Michael Isikoff and David Korn. David Korn is a great journalist, by the way, who broke the story about the Steele dossier a long time ago and has proven to be right on several occasions in this story. But the covert Russian operation to influence the U.S. election, right? The book that they wrote is called Russian Roulette, right? So, and the last one is more to the point I was telling you, is it's not just how they developed them over the years to get and got to this point where they could then influence the campaign to get him elected. It's what's been done since he's been president, man. And so the ongoing attempts to destabilize America and our global allies, right, through basically the manipulation of Trump and his administration. If you want a little bit of information on that, then I would read a book. Let's see, where is that one at? His name. Oh man, did I? I must have wrote it down and didn't save it. There's a Mike.
The author.
Malcolm
Right,
Nance. Just search Malcolm Nance and look for his books. Guy is a brilliant man. Malcolm Nance is his name.
I think Malcolm Nance is the guy with the interview with it's Aaron Mate, which I would recommend everybody Google. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. So at any rate, Mike, there's plenty of investigative journalists, Rob, that have done all the hard, heavy lifting, brother. Go out and read some books, man.
No, but that's the problem, Ray, is that I read the New York Times, I read Washington Post.
Those aren't investigative journalists writing books, Rob, about a topic. These guys are writing books, hundreds of pages,
with many of the people you've mentioned,
one article, I've read a series of articles.
With many, yes, long series of articles are where most of this information comes from. The long series of articles are where almost all the information that the Mueller investigation has put forward come from. So, like, this is all stuff that we've known since 2016 that is given like progressively more and more inflammatory interpretations. Like, I haven't seen much new information. Is it creepy that Trump doesn't record his conversations with Putin?
It's not creepy.
I would like it. I would like it if he did. But did Bush record all of his conversations with Tony Blair? Did all presidents record all their conversations?
Tony Blair was never accused of instilling Bush into the White House through a covert social media and cyber attack campaign.
Yes, exactly. So you're circular here. With the Russia stuff.
That analogy does not hold water.
Is circular. Russia is bad because Russia is bad because Russia is bad and we're suspicious.
No.
It happens with Russia because
Russia is only getting this attention, Rob, because they deserve the attention for what they clearly have done. Like, so
I've read the articles that these books are based on, and
read the book, Rob. Stop. Don't quote me an article. Read the book, then, man, and tell me that all the evidence these gentlemen have, investigative journalists with years of credibility. These are best-selling books. These aren't just some crackpots that are releasing something on some website like the Drudge Report or something. Okay, these are best-selling books that are made by very, very well-respected investigative journalists. And these are not my determinations. These are determinations by a lot of individuals, by our entire military apparatus understands that we have been under cyber attack for years now.
Yeah, they've been trying to push cyber attack for 20 years now. They finally got something that can
our social media. There are cyber attacks that have been meant to penetrate our political apparatus, our election structure and process. They're 1,000% trying to manipulate our culture, our country, our democracy, our political process. To what degree they were successful, we don't know yet, right? The report hasn't come out in full. All the criminal cases are not all done. There will be plenty of legal documents and criminal convictions to look at, Rob, that will prove this out in time. I really do believe that. So that can be the basis of our next bet. I bet there will be legal documentation and criminal convictions that prove conspiracy between Trump administration and the Trump campaign to collude and to conspire and to communicate and share information with the Russian government or entities tied to the Russian government. I mean, just look at the most recent thing. Paul Manafort's ignorant lawyers somehow didn't redact their documents correctly, and it became clear he gave polling data, internal campaign polling data, to the Russian organization that does their hacking, if you will, to know who to target social media wise, to spread discourse, to spread stories, right? Who to target, right? Why would you believe, and you mentioned this yesterday, regardless if that's a crime or not, from day one, thousands of lies have been told that there is no cooperation. There is no agreement. Nobody in my administration has anything to do with Russia. But time and time again, we uncover not only does I don't know what percentage of people in his organization have been tied to Russia in some way or another, but it's a high percentage of individuals within his transition or campaign organization and his administration, Rob, that have been tied to Russia directly, not indirectly, not any of these other made up farce of stories that you can read on any of these number of illegitimate sites. These are direct connections made by our intelligence services. And instead of believing those services, he keeps deferring to the forceful denunciation of Vladimir Putin as evidence enough for him. He ignores all the other evidence collected by Americans that are investigating this as a part of their job and believes the word of an individual who clearly wants to see our country on tough times, wants to see our country weakened and essentially removed from the position of being a world leader.
You mean like what we did to Russia?
I mean, I think Russia still is on the world stage one of the largest players. So I don't know how effective we were at that. I mean, if you're talking about the Cold War, Rob, I don't think it ever stopped. I think we prematurely declared victory, but I don't think it ever stopped. I think they've continued to develop.
No, I think the Soviet Union
covertly tried to influence our country.
The Soviet Union declared peace, and the United States refused to let that happen. And that's the fact that, you know, they did some sort of advertising around the election and a little hacking strikes me as
that is minimizing something that a little advertising, Rob. Is that really what you believe they did? A little advertising?
Yes,
that's what you
exactly
think
what I believe they did.
So you think hacking the DNC, getting polling data, strategically, surgically targeting discourse and conservative voters and middle of the road independents with flat out baseless lies, and that's just one aspect of the campaign that they're waging. One aspect. It's not the only one. So I guess what I don't understand is, why are you refusing to believe that they are and have infiltrated this campaign and this administration?
Because as I said, I'm not refusing to believe that any of these things happen. I am refusing to look at it the same way that I'm refused to look at it from the perspective of the U.S. intelligence community that is reliant on antagonism with Russia to maintain its jobs. I think that would be my baseline critique there.
I don't think that our U.S. intelligence services have to do anything to make Russia into the bad guy. They're doing plenty on their own. They're doing plenty on their own to make themselves out to the bad guy. So I disagree that this is somehow going to keep them in their job. I just don't believe that we really have to do very much work at all to put Russia in a position that they're in. They put themselves there. They willingly developed him as an asset, mostly for financial reasons. And then once they had the opportunity to strike, they took it. They took that opportunity and they did what they could. Whether or not it ended up being the thing that pushed them over the edge it remains to be seen. But I can tell you that they 1,000% have something on Donald Trump. They have him in their pocket.
Maybe, and I look forward to finding out about it. But I think there are many more things that we should pay more attention to. And the idea that
I mean, this would be the biggest
look, right, like
creation of our government in our history. If you could instill an asset in the highest office in the land, Rob, how is this not something that should be driving our discourse? How are we not supposed to be engaged? Concerned about this?
When you think about it, it's actually like the FBI and the CIA have an asset in the highest place of the land. I mean, you've got progressives, Donald Trump. You've got progressives who 3 years ago, you've got progressives who would have been anti-war, who would actually know the history of the intelligence community and complain about it. But now that you've got fucking Donald Trump in there, not only are people fucking intelligence community ghouls like Robert Mueller and James Comey and Clapper and Hyde and all these monsters, heroes now. They're heroes thanks to Donald Trump. Not only is that the case, every pro-peace movement that Donald Trump makes, and he's an idiot, he's terrible, but he does have some instincts on foreign policy that are correct because he sees that, if U.S. foreign policy continues the way it is, we become less powerful because of our idiocy. So every single thing that Trump tries to do that might have a positive impact, get us out of Afghanistan, get us out of Syria, is instantly criminalized as potentially, Russia related, and we can't do it. And MSNBC is let's do the wars longer. It is insane.
Well,
how good Donald Trump has been for the reputation and power of the U.S. intelligence.
For the sake of time, we can go on and on about Russia, but I would like to say this. I believe that Donald Trump's election and how he has conducted himself as president is going to actually benefit our country in the long run because it's awakening an entire generation. It's galvanizing and activating people who wouldn't have been political otherwise. And frankly, if you just look at the midterm results, I mean, for the first time ever, over 100 million people voted in our midterm. 113 million people vote. It's still only 50% of our eligible voters, which is just an abject shame and failure on our part to not participate. However, it's still a record. We still got 41 Democrats elected in this midterm, and we now have congressional oversight. We now have the ability to subpoena people. We now have the ability to get to the facts on some of these matters so that you can get the facts you need to finally come off this ridiculous position that you have. I mean, at the end of the day, the American people aren't buying it, Rob. You may not see it. You may not feel it, but the American people with their votes have made it very clear that they want not only a check and balance on Donald Trump, they want
the
this
U.S. midterm election makes it clear that Trump is involved in Russia? That's absurd. No, the U.S. midterm election
did not flip the House, Rob, and he maintained control of the Senate and the House. Then I would 100% say that America just does not care what Donald Trump does and does not believe all the things that are being said.
No, Donald Trump.
They didn't. They turned out in record numbers. They flipped the House. And now we have checks and balances, at least in one half of our Congress.
Right. I completely agree. I think that's fucking fantastic. But to say that like the U.S. House flipping has anything to do with general perceptions about Russia is incorrect.
100%
the House flipped because Donald Trump is a idiot. Because Donald Trump is a terrible human being.
There's any number of reasons.
He's a terrible fucking president.
You just said it yourself.
Huh?
You just said it yourself. We're watching and dominating. Russia's dominating everything. This is what people have been digesting.
No. Why? And this is how the intelligence community has won here. Why is opposition to this monster, Donald Trump, so wrapped up with one of the dumbest policy failures in U.S. history?
What's that?
That the Soviet Union voluntarily ended the Cold War, and we've continued to fight it for 25 years, and Russia is now a fucking rogue state because we created it, and now opposition to the worst president in U.S. history is now inextricably linked to a really failed and horrible foreign policy. He lost at the midterm election because he's a nightmarishly bad president. It's not about fucking Putin.
Grab your tin hat, Mel Gibson. What are you talking about right now, dude?
It's because,
What are you talking about right now, Rob? You're going off on a major tangent right now. At the end of the day, I agree with you. The Cold War never ended, and we declared some premature victory that never happened. But at the end of the day,
we didn't declare a premature victory. We just kept on fighting it, Ray.
I'm talking about. So, are you telling me right now Ronald Reagan didn't declare victory on the Cold War?
Yes, of course not, because the Berlin Wall didn't fall until George H.W. Bush was president, right?
But George H.W. Bush wasn't the person that they attribute that success to. They attribute it to Ronald Reagan.
They attribute the fall of the Soviet Union to Reagan, but this idea that we never stopped fighting the Cold War is incorrect.
They try to pretend that we won that. That's always been a talking point of conservatives that Ronald Reagan and stood up to communism and stood up to Russia, and they won the Cold War. They didn't win it. In fact, we're fucking losing it right now.
That's absurd. That is absolutely absurd and takes.
They have instilled an asset at the highest office in the land, bro.
And where the United States is in terms of relative power.
Russia is not pulling the strings of Donald Trump, is doing you a disservice, and you will be on the wrong side of history in the future, Rob. You will. You will, 1,000%. You will be on the wrong side of history, my friend, when it comes down to how much.
Because I don't want to start a war with Russia. I'm on the wrong side of history.
Nobody's starting a war. Who's starting a war right now? We're just trying to get the facts.
Like nonstop.
How deeply rooted this rock goes.
You just basically said that the Democrats winning in the House of Representatives is a blow against Russia.
We got to root it out, Rob. There's something's rotten, man, to the core right now in this administration.
Yeah, the U.S. intelligence.
We got to root that out.
The FBI and the CIA are rotten to the core. They need to be rooted out.
Has a lot of Russian flavor to it, my friend. I mean, there's also Saudi Arabia manipulation that's happening.
Exactly. That's exactly my point.
Saudi Arabia.
All these countries do this. The only reason we're talking about Russia is because Russia's the only fucking country we're not teaming up with to start wars. That's why Russia's the bad guy. Saudi Arabia is the bad guy. Israel's the bad guy.
I gotta put on my glasses too, Rob, because right now your glasses are too cool for me, man, and I'm feeling like I'm feeling left out. I'm feeling left out right now. So we're not going to come together on this because we argued about this 2 years ago. It was a very serious and heated argument. I was on the level of the biggest treason ever committed in the history of our country. You were on the level of nobody needs to cover it. We're missing the big picture. Look at all the other bullshit he's doing that should be focused on. I still believe this is the most important story that we should be focused on, simply because I believe, based on the information that I've gathered just from the little bit that snuck out, because Robert Mueller doesn't have leaks. We only get information when it comes out of court filings and documents that are released for that reason. And at the end of the day, I think it's beyond clear that Russia has infiltrated and influenced.
I think the idea of trusting Robert Mueller, the guy who
I trust Robert Mueller.
Sells excels in finding
it's Mueller time,
mentally handicapped Somali immigrants and building terrorist plots around them. That's what Robert Mueller does.
Dude, Robert Mueller III is going to go down in history, man. This guy is going to be well respected. History will look kindly on Robert Mueller III.
History will forget Robert Mueller completely. Anyway, I think we've
Robert Mueller for president.
Fuck Robert Mueller. Fuck James Comey. Intelligence community freak. Fuck those guys.
Listen, Rob, you can't deny the man's running a very he's playing chess right now, and everybody else is playing checkers.
He's a good prosecutor. He knows he's a good attorney. He's a good attorney.
Nothing but results.
Did you ever look into what Robert Mueller did
more indictments, more convictions? I mean, if this was some sort of like abstract witch hunt or whatever, he's collected a lot of witches' scalps, man. The guy is literally just churning and burning convictions right now. I mean, he's got felons coming out left and right.
With the 2016
Donald Trump an unindicted co-conspirator?
There's yet to be a single conviction.
Nobody's talking about that, Rob. Can I ask you that? How can Donald Trump be an unindicted co-conspirator in 2 felony cases and still nobody cares? What Republican's going to stand up, grow a sack, grow a pair of balls, and actually say and call Donald Trump out for his lies
okay.
And for his crime.
I think we've run out of Russia. We're losing viewers, so I think it's a sign it's time to move on. Yeah. And if you guys thought that was heated, you should have heard our conversation last night. I don't think my roommates are going to speak to me after that one.
Can I drop a couple nuggets before we end and go to the Q&A?
Yeah, actually, I have a couple nuggets of my own I wanted to
Okay, cool. Let me drop mine. You drop yours, and you bring us into Q&A, and we're good. I just want to talk about a little hypocrisy. And I don't want to bag on Melania because I think she's in a tough spot. But why is the only campaign that she's come up with been a cyberbullying campaign when her husband is the biggest cyberbully in the world? The hypocrisy of that, I can't even understand why they thought that would be a good campaign for her to run. But her husband, she should start with her husband and work on his Twitter habit and work on his just aggressive, inappropriate behavior on social media. He is a huge cyberbully. I think that's hypocrisy at the highest level. And then the reverse of it is immigration. He's such a hardline immigration stance on our southern border, wanting this wall. Mexico's going to pay for it. Now we got to pay for it. Now we're going to shut the government down to pay for it. Like at the end of the day, immigration's only inconvenient for Donald Trump when it's not, the immigrant is not his wife, who was an illegal immigrant. And then he brought her over here and married her and everything is cool. He's cool with that kind of immigration from Ukraine. But apparently he's not cool with immigrants coming from other portions of South America or Central America or even Mexico, when really that's the heart and soul of our country is immigration. It is being the beacon on the top of the hill that everybody can go to try to go out and be judged on the content of their character and on the work that they're willing to do. And I believe that's what this country is. And I believe him trying to shut a border down or create a wall is the most ridiculous position to take in this day and age. Of what I believe is inclusion.
Like we could do a whole show.
Oh yeah, we didn't get to the congressional shutdown.
U.S. immigration. It's a
We
real.
didn't even do the congressional shutdown.
I need to do some research, and then I think.
Yeah, go ahead with your points, and then I'm ready, man. Appreciate
it. Did you have any other nuggets? You said.
I mean, I have plenty of nuggets, dude. But like, I am after all of this still internally optimistic about our future, as long as people participate, get informed, and vote. So we just turn out and vote.
So just some business keeping before we get to Q&A. I don't know if I'm getting worse at this or if I've just got so many more viewers and commenters now that you guys are catching more stuff. But I wanted to do some errors. I got 2 things, I think, over the past month that I got wrong in videos. And I don't think they're quite big enough to do.
That's pretty good. 2 is not bad, Rob.
Well, thanks, man. I'm sure there's more. But commenters have specifically called out 2 things that I got wrong. They're not big enough to do like full corrections, but in the Sudan video, I guess, is Sudan more likely to end up like Ethiopia or Syria? I said that Sudan was no longer on the on the list of state sponsors of terror that the U.S. government maintains, and I was wrong about that. There has been an opening to Sudan because Sudan is providing child soldiers and other soldiers for the U.S. war in Yemen. We have there's been a diplomatic opening. We have reduced sanctions, but Sudan is still on the terror list, which is kind of ridiculous.
Sudan or Sudan?
Oh, sorry, Sudan, is that the?
I don't know. I'm asking you.
I should know that because I did a video on it recently.
I feel
but
like
I'm terrible on pronunciation. So basically, yes, Sudan is still on the U.S. list of state sponsors of terror, but we are opening up to them and getting rid of sanctions because they're providing cannon fodder for our war in Yemen, our and the Saudis' war in Yemen. So yeah, I was wrong about that. I apologize. I can't remember who called that up. That was good. And then somebody pointed out. I said that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is probably the best known member of the U.S. government other than Donald Trump, and I think that was probably right. She's definitely, I would think, better known.
I heard that Nancy Pelosi is #1 right now, and she's actually #2.
Really? I really, because I think that
that's just what I heard last night watching my blue tinted MSNBC glasses on. That's what I heard last night.
So I was wrong then. But not just that. And then someone also pointed out that Bernie Sanders is really well known. So yeah, I would say that Bernie Sanders, possibly Nancy Pelosi, are better known than Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So that was wrong, but I think that was also a pretty minor correction. So I think I'm going to start doing that in these live chats. I'm going to have a little correction time, assuming I ever get anything wrong again. But, this whole video is about me being wrong. So.
Rob, I mean, yeah, I was going to say, Rob, I mean, you're mea culpa today, buddy.
Yeah.
Took an L. Took a strong L from 2 years ago.
Taking L's everywhere. That's
You're about to take an L on this Russia thing too, bud. I'm sorry to tell you.
I doubt it. But anyway, let's look. Questions. Do we have questions? It is now time for question and answer. There's a bit of a lag here, so I'm just going to say question and answer again. Oh, wow. Brandon Joseph says, look at this. It's a nice comment, Ray. He says, real men wear pink. Nice shirt. There you go, Ray. Yeah.
I appreciate that, Brandon. Thank you, sir. It took me a while to pick this shirt. And, I've always thought that pink and purple were good colors for guys if they had the balls to wear it. So,
okay. Logo Cool Extreme, who's one of our biggest supporters, says, Mo Freedom Foundation, Ray, do you think you're being a bit of a Russia hawk? That's scarier than ISIS, my friend. A weak, collapsed Russia. I suspect collusion, but not enough to go after Russia. What do you say to that, Ray?
Do I think I'm going too hard on Russia? No. I think I'll put it like this. At the end of the day, it may be proven out that I went too hard on Russia, but I've actually been on this from day one because I smell a rat. I have whatever intuition in my gut tells me that Donald Trump is bought and paid for in a way that has compromised him, and that how much damage is he doing internally to our government by potentially being influenced by any number of individuals. But I think Russia is clear in a way the leader of that. Now, I think Saudi Arabia is right up there. I think there's other individuals that are high on the list of being able to influence him. But I think Russia has dirt on him. I think they have influence over him. And I think, honestly, it goes a lot deeper than any of us know. I think the majority of information that will prove out what I'm saying hasn't been released yet because it's part of an ongoing investigation. So
I think so. What I think Loga's alluding to is the fact that what he's talking about, and I think I was talking about last night, is the possibility of Russia collapsing. There was a really frightening article.
Yeah, you said that. I don't see that, Rob. I mean, you really believe that Russia's on a failed state potentially that could collapse?
Yes, and not like as likely as like some other countries, but I think that it's in really, really rough shape. Sort of life expectancy, just sort of GDP per capita, all of this stuff is just, they're falling far, far behind. And what's kind of interesting about Russia is that, it was an empire. That's what it was throughout the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s. So it still includes a lot of, includes a lot of minorities that could naturally want to break off. Chechnya is the most obvious example. And they've got, it's a lot of people like to sort of hyperventilate about the fact that, France is 5% Muslim now or something like that. Well, it's Russia is 20 to 25% Muslim. And also they do have a lot of history of sort of very serious sort of Sunni jihadism there, mostly because the U.S. paid for it. I do think while I'm not saying, oh, Russia's going to break up tomorrow. There was an article in The Hill just last week that I tweeted out at Rabo Law, if you all are interested, that I thought was both very perceptive and fucking terrifying, because it was some Eastern European guy arguing that, you know, Russia was in danger and we should work to break it up. We should work to turn Russia into another Syria.
Yeah, I don't.
And that would be insane. And
I wouldn't go that far to say that they're on the verge of breaking up. I do believe their perception of power is probably not correct. I believe maybe people believe they have are more powerful than maybe they are currently. But I do think that they have effectively disrupted our political process and our culture and our administration in a way that we just really, like I said, don't know how deep it goes and don't know what the impact's going to ultimately be.
Well, I think my focus is more, and I think maybe some of these comments is like not so much on, you know, the effect on the United States, which obviously makes sense to focus on, but it's just understanding that a lot of these actions that Russia took came out of Russia's desperate weakness.
I would agree, but an animal is the most dangerous when they're desperate and they're trapped, cornered, or potentially going to die.
I agree. I agree with that.
That's exactly, and we got one of those animals in the White House right now. So what's he going to do when he gets cornered in and trapped and in a position where he has been? He has no longer a choice. It'll be okay. I think Trump's going to bring down everybody with him. He doesn't strike me as a person to go down by himself. So when he gets to a point where he has no other way to turn and he has to find a way out of this through whether it's a cooperation deal or what have you, that's the direction I think this eventually will go.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that might be a sort of a big, that might be a better way to like encapsulate our disagreement. Like, we don't really necessarily disagree that much about Russia, what Russia may have done. We may disagree about the degree to which the Trump campaign was involved. We don't disagree about what was done.
Yeah.
I think, and you don't think, that it was, I think that Russia's actions were sort of justified self-defense when you look at like the totality, when you look at the totality of what the U.S. has been doing to Russia over the past 30 years. And you would obviously disagree with that strongly.
I think Rob,
that's probably the root of our dispute, actually.
I would agree that your history, your sense of history and knowledge of history probably plays into your opinions a little stronger than I think the average American or the average individual. I think right now most people barely can get outside their own small bubble that they live in, to let alone, you know, look back 10, 20, 30 years. We have a very short memory in this country. But I do believe that the average American is more concerned about this than you are.
I think that's absolutely true. So the Arbiter Light keeps asking me why I shaved, and I shaved because my beard got really fucking long, and it was unmanageable, and I actually am incapable of, basically I'm too lazy to learn how to trim my beard, so I keep growing it while it looks good, and then when it starts looking too big, I shave it off, and then repeat 6 months later. So yeah, that's why I shaved. And then I had to get a haircut because my brother told me I looked like a pedophile with the long hair and no beard. So,
I was actually going to say a caveman. I've seen some caveman looks from you with the hair and the beard.
Yeah. Well, no, but that's good. That's a good look. But with the long hair and no beard,
that's creepy.
That's creepy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's creepy.
And my brother.
That's right out of the Donald Trump playbook. Have you ever seen his mustache, by the way? Can we talk about his
Oh, Jesus. That sounds horrible.
Oh, my God. His facial hair is gross.
Oh, God. Ugh. God, even thinking about it. But yeah, so yeah, my brother very helpfully let me know that I looked like a pedophile, so I shaved my beard. So, so I just got a haircut as well. So,
looks good, man.
Thanks, man. Question from Yafi the Canuck, another big support. Oh, there's that construction you're talking about.
Yeah, let me mute this for a second till I talk.
Yeah. So the Yafi the Canuck has another question.
That won't work. Because I can't hear anything you're saying. I might sign off if it keeps going. If not, I'll.
There's a question for you from Yathi the Canuck. Question to Ray: how is Trump bombing Syria twice for Russian interests?
So yeah, and when it comes to Syria, I would defer to Rob on the specifics of that quagmire. But I would say that what I'm most concerned about with that decision is not so much whether it was a right or wrong decision. It was that everyone that he's hired, like his defense secretary, Jim Mattis, all the individuals on the ground that were responsible for actually actually coordinating with our allies. None of those people were apparently advised of what he was going to do. None of them agreed with what he did, and that was not the advice that they had given. So he's essentially unilaterally making very serious decisions about a very serious situation with none of the backing of the people that are in the position to know. Jim Mattis has 40+ years of military experience, and that's the Secretary of Defense. You would want to, I would imagine, defer to these individuals when you're out of your depth. Trump is always out of his depth, and he's out of his depth, and I don't believe that was a well thought out decision, which then compromises our security. One way or the other, it's bad for our security when he makes decisions that aren't in the best interest and in collaboration with his team of military experts and the people on the ground.
I would disagree with that in minor ways. I think that that's another example of just Trump being a freaking terrible manager. Like he's just utterly incapable of hiring people who want to do what he wants to do. So he has a few good instincts. I would argue that getting out of Syria and Afghanistan, which is very much, I believe, what the U.S. people want, the U.S. public wants, and would be great for our long-term security, as you can see on a series of videos I've got on the channel. But he can't. He's so incapable. He's such a bad manager that he can't hire people who match his priorities, and B, now that he's hired all these crazy hawks like John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, and I have a lot more respect for Jim Mattis, but let's be honest, he too is a crazy anti-Iran hawk.
Yeah, I mean, they call him the Mad Dog. So
exactly, his nickname's freaking Mad Dog. Exactly. So he's hired all these people who have a completely different worldview and a completely different set of priorities from the ones that he does, and he just sort of sits in the Oval Office and he screams at them, and they say, "Yes, Trump. Yes, Mr. Trump, you're the best." And they'll have like a meeting and be like, "You're the best president ever. Like, let me just cup your balls a little bit," and then they go do exactly what they want to do. That's really frightening. Is that we now have sort of a military and a government apparatus that's completely free of leadership. And
what's more frightening, that he hires people called Mad Dog, or that he doesn't even listen to the people called Mad Dog, and he ends up doing what everyone widely considers is just a knee-jerk poor decision in a very serious situation. So
and also specifically on Mattis, there's a really interesting news report coming out, I think it was yesterday, that Mattis is just lying to the press about our involvement in Yemen. Apparently there's some serious training going on of UAE pilots that are blowing up school buses. I guess it was the Saudis that blew up the school bus. But Mattis was also, he's a great general or whatnot, but he also didn't really care about the public and didn't necessarily think the public needed to know anything about what he was doing. So I got to say,
I hate to sound like a supporter of the military-industrial complex, because I am not. So it's just Trump puts me in these weird situations where I have to defend people that I would normally not defend or agree with because of how ridiculously he's just, I think he is one of the most uninformed individuals that I've ever come across that has this much content out there, and he's also a habitual liar, which makes it very difficult to figure out what's strategy, what's him just being uninformed, what's him just being a flat out seen-out old man who read his Twitter feed or saw Fox News tweeted something and then went out and made a knee-jerk reaction that does affect American lives, and that's where it becomes real, right?
Yeah, no, and I totally hear that, and I think a lot of people are in that place of confusion. One really nice thing about Trump is that he's gotten so many more people involved in the process. Like, as you pointed out with the midterm was, I think, the biggest, certainly the biggest.
113 million people turned out. It was only 50% of eligible voters, but still, we had never cracked 100 million in a midterm. And so that goes to show how apathetic we are when we vote in our midterms. But that also goes to show people are engaged right now, and they're activated, and they are not going to sit by and let this type of behavior continue.
Yeah, but I think that people are kind of desperate for like real adults. So they do tend to be more trusting than they should be of these figures that kind of got us into this mess.
Who's the adult in the room right now? I mean, that's a good point. Who's the adult in the room right now? Who do you hang your hat on? That's why I actually like Jim Mattis, was that I was like, oh, at least there's one guy that will prevent the button from being pushed or really, really bad things from happening. But when he leaves,
there's no denying that was also I mean, that's the way that our allies looked at him. Like the Japanese, the Europeans were like, well, geez, well, thank God Mattis is there. And now it's literally, the acting guy is literally an executive from Boeing.
Yeah.
Like it's literally the military industrial complex.
I mean, this goes back to
to lead the defense.
His hires are unbelievably poor, right? He hires people that are just not qualified to do the job they're being hired for. You know, it's unbelievable.
It's amazing for a guy that's supposedly so antagonistic to the Republican establishment and supposedly bringing in this new politics, new movement. And as far as hiring, like his Rolodex is just the bargain basement of like the worst, most corrupt, disgusting jokes that the Republican Party has to offer. You know, like it's insane. Okay, so Zikafoos 2020 asks, don't you think impeachment is a bad idea? Wouldn't it be better to vote out Trump fair and square? What do you think of that, Ray?
So I don't think impeachment's a bad idea if there's grounds to impeach him, right? So if there's legitimate crimes committed and grounds to impeach him, we need to impeach this individual because that's the way our process is supposed to work. However, I agree that to permanently root this out, I believe it's got to be rooted out legally. That's why I believe it's important to let these legal proceedings continue, investigations to continue. And I think, yes, the American people standing up and voting him out on his ass and the Republicans out on their ass would be the best possible scenario for our country. But there's still 2 more years. We got to wait 2 more years for that. And what kind of damage can be done? So if there's grounds for impeachment, which I believe there already has been, think about it. They impeached Bill Clinton for lying about having an affair. So, I mean, if we're talking about all the other things that not only has he lied about or people or things that crimes has been committed, I mean, he's an unindicted co-conspirator to 2 felonies right now, right? So they could impeach him if they truly want. They just don't have the votes. They got to get some Republicans to grow a pair of balls and to step across the line so they can get 60 votes in the Senate. And that's just not going to happen right now.
There's no question that he's got that like bribery. Like there's no question. The House, I think, within the next 6 months,
obstruction. I mean, that's an easy one.
Maybe, but more importantly, bribery. Like it's offensive. Like the fact that every corporation and country that has anything that Trump's going to make a decision about buys a whole bunch of hotel rooms either in DC or in New York. That's flat out bribery. That's absolutely impeachable. That's what's the word? Emoluments. I can't pronounce.
Yeah, the emoluments clause. Yeah. What about Trump Charitable Foundation in New York that just got dissolved, and then that case in the state of New York is highlighting essentially all of the shady business that he has been doing for some time now. Frankly, that his father taught him to do. His father was very good at enabling and using his children to hide and sheltered money. I mean, these guys are tax evaders of the highest order.
So there's no question that it would be possible to impeach. Yeah. I'm not, honestly, I go back and forth. Part of me is like, impeach the motherfucker, but part of me is kind of like, because it's like this guy you'd mentioned he's like a caged rat or whatever, like because he's desperate. He will be more desperate too. And he's got diminishing capacity, and he's got the nuclear codes. That's pretty fucking terrifying. So
I think we should impeach Rob if the evidence comes out to light where people like yourself can come across the other side of this and say he clearly is not only a criminal on these fronts, but has broken these laws and or had these impeachable offenses. We should go through with it. However, I don't believe it'll ever get there because Trump's not the kind of guy to sit back and go through something like that. His skin is too thin. I think he would plead out and resign to something that would enable him to protect his assets and himself. Yeah. And so that's what I think is most likely to happen. Then we get Pence, which is terrible. I'm just hoping Pence is wrapped up in all the campaign influence issues because he was also very high in the campaign team, the transition team that was with buddy with Manafort and
one of the nice things is I think that the Trump organization is kind of inevitably going to be destroyed at this point.
Yeah, they already dissolved, right? It's just a matter is it going to take him and his children and all their what about the CFO?
So you're talking about the Trump Foundation. I'm talking about like the Trump organization, his family business,
his corporate business.
It's an instrument for bribery.
Yeah, no, they are being. No, you're right. I've seen all the stories on all the training rooms out in the DC property.
Yeah. All right, so we should move on to another question. Do you think the Yellow Vest movement will come to the United States? Asks Mr. Methuselah. Honestly, I don't know enough about the Yellow Vest movement.
I would. My guess is no, simply because we do a better job of stamping out protesters in this country, and people here would wear all black and try to hide themselves, not wear a bright yellow vest and run out and say, "Look, I'm right here. Get me on camera so I can be criminally prosecuted later." However, I do believe. And I think this is very interesting. I'm glad they asked this. I think France and some of European countries are having there's a lot of similar issues that are happening in parallel across the country. Immigrant sentiment, a lot of this anti-establishment sentiment. The notion, I think, in France is that they're just better at producing results with their protests. I think gas tax didn't last very long at all. I mean, they got that thing reversed very quickly. But it's the same adage. If you negotiate with a terrorist, and I'm not calling them terrorists, once you negotiate once, well, now that they got that result, they're going to keep pushing to get more and more things. So in this country, it doesn't seem like we have that kind of stick-to-itiveness. You know, we have an issue, we get real fired up about it, we press forward to make some progress, and then it just dies out.
Well, honestly, I think it's just it's one of the virtues of a more decentralized system. Like the reason France or Turkey is another good example, and a lot of European countries, a lot of countries in the world are so easy to shut down by the use of mass movements, is because they've typically got one or two cities. Like if we had like an incredible mass movement, burning cars, yellow vests, shut down DC entirely. I mean, for the past month, Washington, DC has been shut down by a one-man protest movement from the Oval Office. And who cares? Who gives a shit?
I mean, I think I don't see that movement coming here, but I think
I agree. But that's what I'm saying is just structurally, like Occupy Wall Street was like tremendously disruptive in New York City and weirdly in Oakland, California, but
LA had an encampment.
It's a big country.
Being there.
Yeah, it's a big country. So with lots of different centers of power, there's no one city that you can shut down to make the president pay attention to you.
I do think, and this is related, I do think there has been a very positive movement. Like for instance, against gun violence in schools. I think a lot of high schoolers mobilized very effectively recently and got results in the state of Florida, for instance. And the state of Florida is a very gun-friendly state, and they passed some gun legislation through that movement. I think the Me Too movement, I think the women's, the record number of women being represented in our Congress. I do see a lot of movements, and I do see a lot of political activization, people being more active politically, but I just don't see that type of Yellow Vest movement is unique in that these guys are like hitting the streets, taking things over, burning stuff down. I mean, I don't see that happening here and being effective, because then they would essentially be talked about being rioters and looters, and they would discredit whatever they were trying to accomplish pretty quickly.
Jesus Christ. Loco Cool Extreme says, Rob, was the haircut part of losing the bet? Because seriously, what is that? You look like a divorced dad in a midlife crisis. Jesus, man. Fucking harsh. Well, it'll grow back, Loga. I'm going to go home and cry. What the fuck? Anyway. Wow. All right. Jesus Christ. Arbor Light goes, yeah, he shouldn't shave. Better to look at a Viking than Barney Rubble.
Oh, my
Like from the Flintstones.
They're going in on you right now.
God damn. That's heartbreaking. Anyway.
I got to tell you, I've seen several variations of your appearance, and this is not the worst. So. All
right. Well, thanks, man.
Yeah, it looks decent, Rob. I'll give you a little bit of love, man.
I appreciate that, Ray.
Got the blazer on.
Maybe I won't go slit my wrist. Yeah. Fado Guetta asked thoughts on Haftar's forces closing in on Tripoli. I've been meaning to do real research on Libya for a while, but man, we destroyed that country. Haftar, my understanding is Haftar is sort of the big, the most likely looking new strongman, and I would obviously support, even if it was a strongman, one government in Libya. That country desperately needs to be centralized. It's literally been since 2011 now. it's been 7 or 8 years. Oh, yeah, almost 8 years as a stateless mess. So though I'm sure Haftar is brutal and evil and wrong in all kinds of ways, if he can successfully take over the whole country, that would be a tremendous victory. Be great for oil prices. And I think it would be, most importantly, actually, and I think a reason I can sort of morally square Haftar's taking over Libya would be to have Libya at peace would be excellent for Tunisia. Tunisia is the one country that in the Arab world after the Arab Spring that successfully created a democratic system, and it is suffering right now. It is, they've gotten the political rights, they haven't gotten the economy they expected and wanted out of that. And one of the main reasons they don't have that economy is because their next door neighbor, Libya, is a failed state. So yeah, even if Haftar came in and turned it into a strongman situation, it would be much, much better for the democracy in Tunisia. So yes, I'm sure Haftar is a terrible guy, but if anybody can consolidate Libya, that's a good for the world. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Haftar and Libya, even though I have not done the research on it. I should. Next question, or do you have something you want to weigh in on Libya, Ray?
No, I'm going to stay away from the Libya front for now. You can go ahead and own that.
Okay, another Logan Cool Extreme, who I am much less of a fan now that he thinks I look like a divorced dad, but is generally a big supporter. Asks, Ray, don't you think you're worrying too much about Trump? He's an idiot who will be gone by 2020. Why lose sleep over that moron?
Yeah, good question. I don't lose sleep over Trump, so that just to put everyone's mind at ease, I sleep quite well. But I am concerned about the damage that's being done that we're just not aware of. I don't know how else to say this other than I believe he's working to serve the best interests of others and himself, and we're not going to truly know what kind of damage was done until we get some capable elected officials back in the White House and back in the executive branch, having it operate independently in the way that it's intended to. And so I'm concerned about our ability to continue to be that shining light, if you will, for the world. I don't know what it's going to take to recover our global and moral standing in the world, but it seems to have taken a major hit. So I don't worry about Trump. I don't lose sleep over him as an individual. It's more about the fact that he represents our country. His behavior represents us in a way that I just can't ever square, in a way that I can't ever be okay with. So in my own way, I just try to stay informed. I try to educate those who seek information, and I try to participate in the conversation so that we don't ever find ourselves here again where somebody that was favored by the minority is now making rules for the majority.
Yeah, so I'm generally sympathetic to this. We should definitely focus on something other than Trump. But at the end of the day, he's still the motherfucker's still president.
Yeah, his decisions have ramifications right now. That's the reality.
So while I think a given half hour on CNN should be should not be 100% or 95% Trump the way it is now, it'll never be less. It should never be less than 50% Trump, because this guy is the president and he is a disaster. We need to focus on other things too, but he's still the goddamn president.
What would be interesting, Rob, is ironically, I think if we were to remove all coverage of him from TV, I think that would have more of a damage. That would do more damage to him and than actually covering him as much as we do. I think that's what he seeks. He seeks adulation. He seeks validation in that medium. That's why he always going on Fox and Friends. That's why he's parodying all the stuff that comes from that network. It seems like the Democrats and other news organizations have learned to manipulate him through the media, right? It's super interesting, that dynamic. But at the end of the day, until we're rid of this man, you have to stay vigilant. You have to stay informed and on top of things, because frankly, he may be selling out. You may come home and all your stuff is gone. You know what I mean? That's what it feels like. That I come home from work after Trump administration and he's sold everything, and tried to change the locks on me. So
this is an interesting question. So some guy with a this 09NE8SMZPZTT asks, here's what I can't understand. You guys keep talking about the profound global damage that Bush and Obama perpetrated in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, and yet you're in arms about Trump. How does this make any moral sense? That's an interesting question. I have been operating this YouTube channel since 2011, but every day since every Tuesday since December 2014, and I talked about Syria, and I talked about Iraq, and I talked about U.S. damage long before Trump was an issue. I think this question does sort of get at something that's interesting. Is that I think a lot of people assume. I think more people in the United States assume that we are viewed as like the light, the shining hill and the light of the world than we actually are abroad. Specifically, this channel has a large viewership in the Middle East, and from the Middle East perspective, Trump is probably actually not from the Yemeni perspective or the Syrian, northern Syrian.
What about Iran? They can't like him. They tore up their agreement as soon as he entered office.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously Iran doesn't like that, but as far as like actually trying to pull troops out of Syria, like
Saudi Arabia likes him. I know that.
Trump is the first president in the past. Of the first president this century who has yet to start a new Middle Eastern war, and I think that is a key thing. I mean, what do you say to that, Ray? Like, because I think I do a pretty good. I think I'm actually pretty okay. As far as this question, I went after Obama and I go after Bush.
I'll answer this in two parts. You've spared nobody. You've went after every administration that I've, since I've known you. You've went after each administration for what you believe is their mistakes made from a global standpoint.
I don't like power.
Yeah. So I mean, I will give you credit there. I would say that I don't have a lot of the similar stances that you have on certain administrations, certain past decisions when it comes to certain wars. I am anti-war. I am not about large military industrial complex that tries to police the world. At the same time, I do believe we have a responsibility to be that entity within the global community that can be looked to for support for those less fortunate that can't defend themselves. I do believe there's a role to play that we have to play, and partly because we help create a lot of the messes that we're dealing with, but also because it seems to be the nature of humanity that you need, and maybe it won't be this way in the future, but you need a leader. You need a leadership. You need some entity to step up and provide a vision for where we should go as a species, as a people. Well, I think has done that successfully on many occasions. And they also have made many, many mistakes when it comes to the illegitimate wars that have been started and or mistakes diplomatically. So, well,
that's why I find sort of the U.S. military industrial complex so frustrating. Because to a more limited extent, I agree with you, Ray. I do think that the U.S. in some respects has been sort of sending a message of hope, trying to help, this, that, and the other thing. But I think I have a much, much grimmer view of how that's worked out in practice since 1989, specifically, like since the end of the Cold War. Like I would say that, well, yes, I think, the world does benefit from having one guy in charge. I would say that unfortunately, it's like, I think I had put it once, it's like the U.S. military-industrial complex is unfortunately necessary, but it's also trying to kill us. I think the extent to which the U.S. has created almost all of the problems that we've been supposedly solving is underappreciated in the United States. And, that's half the mission of this YouTube channel. But yeah, no, I do agree that like at the end of the day, like, there are elements of the U.S. lifestyle, U.S. Approach to certain higher concepts, this, that, and the other thing, that has the potential to be, attractive worldwide and has been attractive worldwide and has had a positive influence. Unfortunately, and I think, the negative influence is sort of growing and snowballing in a way. And that's one of the reasons I think I give Trump a little more leeway, certainly than Ray does and some other people do, is that I think the way to sort of stop this snowballing negativity that we've seen under Clinton, Bush, Obama is to just fucking stop killing people.
Yeah.
Just stop bombing, you know, just like, yeah, you know, like if we pulled out of Afghanistan today, the Taliban would instantly take over, or something along those lines. Maybe there'd be negotiation, but we wouldn't be killing people there anymore. Yeah. And the Taliban would probably spend about 5 years, you know, raging against everybody, and then say, you know, gosh, we'd kind of like it if you came in here and built us a dam, you know, and that would be it. It would be over, you know.
Well, I mean, I think that might be a bit of a simplification for that particular quagmire, but
not really, because if you look at the late '90s, Taliban was like half the time they were like, you know, we're gonna beat our women and, you know, this, that, and the other thing, and then the other half of the time they're like, but hey, if you could give us some money. So yeah, I think it's actually bribing dictators is much more effective than bombing.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, there's several strategies can be employed. I agree with you. Violence, killing individuals. I mean, these create lifetime enemies and resistances. And usually the diplomatic process is proven out in history to be the most effective way to solve problems, is bringing people to the table and having their voices be heard and coming up to some compromised agreement. We're just living in a world where civility and compromise are two words that just are rarely used and exercised. And I think that's what we need to get back to from a governing and diplomatic standpoint.
I agree completely. But I think the problem is that we created that world. Like the U.S. sets the tone, and the tone that we've been setting has not been about being a city on the hill or having, you know, our great values. The tone we've been setting, certainly since 9/11 and probably before, is we're going to go kill people.
I think you have some validity to what you're saying, but I also think that during the Obama years, I don't know that we were ever more respected globally when it comes to other countries collaborating with us and having respect for our administration and our positions that we were taking. I mean, I thought he actually restored after Bush torched our global reputation.
I think that's true.
Yeah, and so I think we had a golden opportunity to. But he was. Put a administration in power after Obama that could have continued to build on that, and we could have saw like I said, the Supreme Court would look very different. A lot of things would look very different because the 2016 election went a different way, which is why I cannot move past the possibility of that outcome being illegitimate. And if the outcome was illegitimate because of the influence of these other entities we discussed, that has to be rooted out. That has to be prevented. We have to address those weaknesses and those there always will be attacks on America. There will always be people trying to influence America. But if we ignore these things and then try to brush them under the carpet because they're not convenient, because we don't want to go through impeachment, or because we don't want to have egg on our face for the world to see that we elected somebody that was an asset of some other institution, I mean, that would be far greater. That would do more damage, in my opinion, than actually going through the pain of dealing with the minority of this country that is, frankly, knuckle draggers that don't want to move into the future. I would think a good chunk of the people that support Trump, that still support him after all this time, are people that just aren't ready to see the world move forward, aren't ready to see this country move forward.
It's mostly just old white men.
I mean, I'm not going to oversimplify it, but there's a lot of those there as well. Yes.
So question is, Kikesa asks, what do you think about Nord Stream 2? I'm not entirely sure what Nord Stream 2 is. I think that might be the pipeline that's avoiding Eastern Europe between Russia and Germany, and I don't really have any deep thoughts about that. I think that's potentially difficult for Belarus and Ukraine, but yeah, I don't have any real deep thoughts on that. Any other questions? Do we have other?
Rob, I got 3 minutes, buddy, and I got a hard stop for a work-related thing. I got to pay the bills.
All right, and I guess I'll. Oh well, 3 minutes anyway. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. We're almost the 2 hour thing anyway.
Yeah. So if there's any last minute questions or anything, I would certainly love to take them.
Well, Logo Cool Extreme goes, went nuclear. I don't think that's something you can answer in 3 minutes. But Ray, as an African American, have you had firsthand experience with police brutality and police racial profiling? Can you confirm Rob's views on police violence?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. And yes, I have unfortunately had several run-ins with police and other authority figures that I felt were inappropriate as well as racially motivated. I'm mixed, half black, half white, and while I do look like an African American, and I feel like that's how I identify because those are the shoes that I walk in, I have a very vast experience with the racial makeup and the racial culture within our country. It's something that I don't think we ever properly address. I think we're trying to sweep under the rug decades and centuries of oppression that need to be acknowledged and addressed. I believe the police state is 100%, not 100%. I believe the police state is in need of some serious sensitivity training, right? Like they have to evolve and move forward and start to try to police more uniformly without letting these bias affect their decisions, because we do have a criminal justice system that disproportionately targets minorities and those disadvantaged and less able to protect themselves. So it's a very complicated question and topic that Rob and I can spend a lot of time on, but I do believe there's a major racial issue, underlining issue in our country that it won't go away until it's addressed. And I think part of Trump, part of the Freedom Caucus, part of the Deep South and some of those things are coming to a head. And it's ugly. We don't like it. Charlottesville, I mean, these things are happening. They're real. And we absolutely need to have a conversation. We need to continue to talk about it and address it. And I think, at least in the long term, we'll end up breeding this problem away, right? Everybody will be some shade of brown eventually, right? So
it's a procreative racial reconstruction.
Right? So, but yes, police brutality is real. I've experienced it. I choose not to focus on it. I choose to learn from it and move forward, but it is a real thing.
Yeah. Well, Ray, thank you so much. I guess I'll go on for another 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Ending spiel, but thank you so much, Ray.
Absolutely. The More Freedom Foundation, man. I appreciate you, Rob. I appreciate all the work you do. It's good to see you, buddy. And you've definitely reinvigorated my political passion with our offline conversations that we've been having. So I look forward to coming back and doing something later with you.
All right, Ray. And as we always close, go blue, right?
Oh, yeah. Go blue. Go blue.
All right.
All right, buddy. Appreciate it, Rob.
Just to sort of close up here. Okay, so the guy with whose number looks like a bad password for Wi-Fi says, thanks for responding to my question, but you're really creating what is, in my opinion, a gross moral equivalence between hundreds of thousands of unnecessary deaths versus a guy that wants to fill hotel rooms. And I get the sense that you're just not really very familiar with the content of this channel, because when Trump has done things that will lead to less death in the Middle East, I have celebrated that. I have multiple videos that have congratulated and thanked Trump for his ending of the CIA program that destroyed Syria. In the past month, I have put up stuff that talks about how his choice, his poorly managed attempt to get out of Syria is a fantastic choice. But this idea that Trump, because presumably you like Trump, is somehow different from the presidents that have come before him in the totality of his foreign policy approach is wrong. He destroyed the Iran deal, which was, in my opinion, the best potential for long-term peace in the Middle East and the world in general, that one of the best things that we've seen. He has intensified the death and destruction in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, and in other places. He has completely taken the reins off the Pentagon and the Defense Department and Mad Dog Mattis as far as what they're actually doing for special operations and drones and assassinations. Trump is better in that he hasn't gotten it together to start a war yet. That's fantastic. But I really am a bit confused by this idea that Trump's policy is different from the presidents that came before him. When he does do different things, I celebrate it. But it's not different in the aggregate. He's actually not really done much to improve things with Russia either. So, yeah, I'd say I think it's a gross moral mistake to argue that Trump's policy at this point is dramatically different from sort of military-industrial complex standard. So that's that. I guess any last questions? Let's see. So I think that we are pretty much, can Japan and Turkey win a war on U.S. hegemony in the 2050s? I would say no. I think that's sort of a George Friedman fantasy, Stratfor stuff. I don't really see that book. That approach came out about 10 years ago. I don't see a lot that makes that seem likely. I think they were also talking about Poland being a new power of some sort, and yeah, I don't think that makes sense. Mr. Methuselah says, Rob, you should plan a meetup for your fans. And honestly, I have got so much stuff that I really need to get done, and I can add that to the list, I suppose. All right, thanks. My name is Robert Morris. That was Ray, my old roommate, and this is the More Freedom Foundation. We have new videos every Tuesday. I'd suggest if you've gotten it to this point, I'm sort of put a lot more effort and time into my shorter videos. I'd suggest checking those out. Those are 4 to 7 minute hits, and I don't claim to be an expert on anything that I cover. I just claim to do a better job than any cable news channel. That's sort of what I do. Every Tuesday I put out these videos. You can follow me on Twitter at RobOLaw. You can follow me on Instagram at The Golden Age. I have a short book called Everybody's Lying About Islam that I think gives you what you need to know about the Middle East and sort of terrorism generally, and sort of how we got into this situation that is sort of now kind of fading away. It's mostly about the U.S.-Saudi relationship. So that's worth reading. Currently writing a book called Avoiding the British Empire that is taking a long time. If you'd like to support the work that we do, I believe I've got in the description of this video a link to Patreon and a link to PayPal. So thank you so much for tuning in. It's been about 2 hours. So I think I will call it a day. And none of this would be possible if it weren't for all of you amazing people who participate in these conversations and watch, like, subscribe, and all that. Thank you so much. Have an amazing day. Stop broadcasting.